Ezra Whitmore had never expected life to be easy, but at 42, he had come to a painful realization that it might never be anything more than a series of disappointments. The collapse of his marriage to Claire had set the stage for a downward spiral that he struggled to recover from. At one time, he had believed in the idea of a life filled with purpose, love, and ambition. But now, those ideals felt like distant memories, lost to the passage of time. His marriage had been a casualty of miscommunication, unspoken grievances, and unmet expectations. As the years passed, those wounds only deepened, and a relationship that once seemed so full of promise slowly withered away. The divorce left Ezra feeling fragmented, unsure of who he was anymore. He sought solace in his work as a contractor, though the physical labor only distracted him for so long. His days were filled with repetitive tasks, and his nights in his small, barren apartment were full of painful silence. The apartment, though modest, was a reflection of his emotional state, empty, cold, and devoid of warmth. Ezra spent countless evenings alone, staring at the blank walls, wondering where he had gone wrong. The thought that perhaps this was all life had to offer plagued him constantly. He often found himself reflecting on the life he had lost. What would it have been like if things had gone differently? Could he have fought harder to save his marriage? Could he have been a better man, a more present partner? The questions gnawed at him, making his solitude feel even more unbearable. But in the midst of this emotional turmoil, Ezra never could have predicted the letter that would arrive one seemingly ordinary afternoon. It came in the form of a manila envelope, its contents completely unexpected. The letter was from his late Uncle Morris's lawyer, a man Ezra hadn't spoken to in years. His relationship with Morris had been distant at best. Morris was a quiet man who had preferred solitude, much like Ezra had done in his own life. But the letter from the lawyer revealed something that shook him to his core. Ezra had inherited something far more valuable than he could ever have imagined. Inside was a deed to a 2,100-acre lake, along with water rights that had been passed down through generations of the Whitmore family. These were not just ordinary land rights. They were coveted water rights, fought for by Ezra's great-grandfather, Silas Whitmore, back in 1887. The realization that he now owned such an immense legacy was overwhelming. A piece of history, a lake that had been a symbol of his family's endurance and resilience, was now his responsibility. For the first time in years, Ezra felt something stir inside him, a sense of purpose. But with this inheritance came an even greater responsibility. Could he, Ezra Whitmore, a man who had barely managed to rebuild his life after his divorce, truly manage something so valuable? Was he prepared to honor the legacy of his great-grandfather and protect what had been fought for so long? Ezra struggled with these questions, feeling both the weight of his ancestors' expectations and the fear of failing them. Ezra had spent the next several days at the lake, walking its shorelines, reflecting on what the inheritance meant to him. The air was crisp and refreshing, and the stillness of the water provided him with a rare moment of peace. Standing by the edge of the lake, Ezra could almost feel the presence of his ancestors, their struggles, their triumphs, and their dreams. For a brief moment, it felt as though the weight of his family's legacy was something he could handle. But that moment of tranquility was short-lived. A sleek, white Escalade appeared on the gravel driveway, its tires crunching against the stones as it made its way toward the lake. Ezra watched as the car came to a halt. A woman stepped out, her heels clicking against the gravel with a precision that mirrored her calculated confidence. She was tall, impeccably dressed, and exuded an air of authority that seemed out of place against the peaceful backdrop of the lake. This was Cordelia Blackwood, the president of the Homeowners Association, HOA, and she had come to make demands. Cordelia's presence was commanding, almost overwhelming. She walked toward Ezra with a sense of purpose that left little room for negotiation. Without even exchanging pleasantries, she handed him a formal violation notice. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice cool and controlled, "I'm here to inform you that the HOA requires you to pay a monthly fee of $500 for the use of this lake." Additionally, your dock does not meet HOA standards and must be removed immediately. The word was like a slap in the face. Ezra stood there, stunned, as his mind raced to process what she was saying. His inheritance, the land his family had fought for, was now being threatened by a stranger who seemed to think that she had the right to dictate how he used it. The realization hit him like a wave. This wasn't just a fee or a minor violation. This was an outright challenge to his family's legacy. And Cordelia, with her calm, detached demeanor, was trying to take it from him without a second thought. Ezra's heart began to race, his hands clenched into fists. "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising with frustration. "This land, this lake, it's been in my family for generations. You don't have any right to impose these fees or remove my dock." Cordelia's response was calm, almost dismissive. "I'm afraid, Mr. Whitmore, the HOA has jurisdiction over all property in this area. If you refuse to comply, we'll take legal action." As Cordelia's car drove away, Ezra stood on the dock, the weight of her words sinking in. His mind was a whirlpool of confusion, anger, and disbelief. How could someone like her come into his family's space, a place so rich with history, and treat it like it was nothing more than a commodity to be bought and sold? This wasn't just about money, it was about respect. Cordelia was disrespecting the very foundation of his family's legacy, and that was something Ezra couldn't ignore. The peaceful sound of the lake's waves gently lapping against the shore only intensified the storm raging inside him. His anger burned hot, but beneath that anger was something deeper, a fear that he might lose what his family had fought so hard to protect. His great-grandfather had battled for the water rights. His ancestors had worked tirelessly to ensure the lake remained in their family's hands. And now, it felt like all of that was slipping away, taken by someone who didn't care about the legacy attached to it. But as he stood there, staring out over the lake, something shifted inside him. His hands unclenched. His thoughts cleared. He wasn't just angry anymore. He had a purpose. This battle wasn't just about a dock or a fee. It was about defending what had been his family's for generations. Ezra was no longer just fighting for property. He was fighting for history, for family, and for respect. The confrontation with Cordelia left Ezra feeling both exhausted and energized. He knew he couldn't take her on alone. The complexity of the legal issues involved, the financial stakes, and the influence of the HOA were far beyond what he could handle on his own. So, he reached out for help. That's when he found Tommy Reeves, a young lawyer who had recently opened his own practice. Tommy was eager to prove himself, and when Ezra shared his story, Tommy was immediately on board. "We'll make sure Cordelia doesn't get away with this," Tommy said, his voice filled with determination. "She's playing a dangerous game, but she's underestimated you, Ezra. You've got something far more valuable than she realizes." Together, they began the tedious process of gathering evidence. Tommy reviewed every legal document Ezra had, starting with the deeds and contracts related to the water rights. As he sifted through the records, Tommy's eyes lit up with excitement. He found that the water rights were legally secured and protected by law, passed down from Ezra's great-grandfather. There was no way Cordelia could lay claim to them. But the more they dug, the more they uncovered. It wasn't just a case of a dispute over land rights. Cordelia was involved in something far more sinister. Ezra and Tommy discovered that Cordelia had been exploiting her position within the HOA for personal gain. She had been extorting money from property owners under false pretenses, inflating fees, and siphoning funds into her personal accounts. Ezra's anger deepened as he realized the full scope of Cordelia's corruption. She wasn't just a woman trying to control his property. She had been manipulating and exploiting the entire community for years. As the investigation deepened, they found evidence that Cordelia had been using the HOA's funds for personal ventures. She had been funneling money from the HOA into her own real estate projects, taking advantage of her position to line her pockets. Ezra and Tommy realized that Cordelia wasn't just trying to take his land. She had been using the HOA as a tool for financial gain. Mavis Lane, an elderly neighbor who had lived in the community for decades, became an invaluable ally. She had witnessed Cordelia's manipulative tactics firsthand, but had been too afraid to speak out. However, seeing Ezra fight back gave her the courage to share what she knew. Her testimony would be crucial in exposing Cordelia's corruption. With this newfound evidence, Tommy and Ezra felt more confident than ever. They had not only the legal right to the property, but also the moral high ground. Cordelia's reign was coming to an end. Preparing for the showdown, Tommy worked tirelessly, preparing their case. He crafted a strategy that would not only expose Cordelia's illegal actions, but also ensure that Ezra's inheritance was protected. But they knew that the court alone wouldn't be enough. They needed to take the fight to the public. Tommy reached out to local media outlets, offering them evidence of Cordelia's corrupt practices. The story spread quickly, and soon the entire community was buzzing with outrage. Ezra's support grew, and the pressure on Cordelia mounted. Cordelia, sensing the growing resistance, called for a community meeting, hoping to rally support and regain control. But this time, Ezra was ready. Armed with evidence, public support, and a newfound sense of purpose, he walked into that meeting prepared to expose Cordelia for the fraud she was. At the HOA meeting, tensions were high. Cordelia stood at the front, her usual air of arrogance diminished by the mounting pressure. Ezra stood before the crowd, his heart pounding, but his resolve unwavering. As he presented the evidence of Cordelia's corruption, the room grew silent. One by one, the community members began to realize the truth. Cordelia had been exploiting them for years, and now, her actions were exposed for all to see. As the truth sank in, the room erupted in anger. Cordelia, once so powerful, was now stripped of her influence. Her reign of control was over. The community voted to remove her from her position, and Ezra's victory was sealed. A new beginning. With Cordelia's fall, Ezra felt a sense of relief wash over him. The battle was over, but it had changed him. No longer the man who had doubted his worth or his place in the world. Ezra now stood tall, proud of the legacy he had protected and the future he had secured. As he stood by the lake, watching the sun set over the horizon, he realized that his fight wasn't just for land. It was for his own sense of purpose. He had discovered something in himself that he hadn't known was there: strength, resolve, and the courage to stand up for what mattered most. The lake, once a symbol of uncertainty and fear, had now become a symbol of victory. Ezra had reclaimed his family's legacy, and in doing so, he had reclaimed his own future. And as he looked out over the peaceful waters, he knew that the legacy of the Whitmore family would live on, in him and in the generations to come.